geologist at the BGS, and along with my colleague Alan MacDonald and ICET Nepal, we've been trying to characterise groundwater supplies in the Middle Hills. The work we're doing forms a case study within a wider research project in the Indo-Gangetic Basin, which is funded by DFID. Why are we doing this work? Well, Guy Howard touched on this earlier. There is concern that as global temperatures increase and the Terai, the southern part of Nepal, gets very hot, that people are going to want to migrate away to the more temperate Middle Hills. But we know very little about groundwater supplies in the Middle Hills. There's been very little research done there, there's very little data, and we don't know how vulnerable they are to climate change. So we've been undertaking a programme of fieldwork out there, and we've been doing water sampling. We've been looking at chemistry, groundwater ages, groundwater residence times, to try and understand more about how these groundwater systems behave and how vulnerable they might be to future change. And when we talk about resilience of supplies, we're not just talking about climate. It's an important part of the story, but we're also thinking about other things such as population changes, changes in water use, changes in land use, so we can build up a bigger picture of what's happening in these communities. So we've prepared a very short video for you where we're talking to the local communities about these issues. So I'll stop talking now and we'll play the video. I'd just like to apologise for the shakiness in the video. So it's authentic.
Nepal is famous for its high mountains, the high Himalayas, the 7,000 and 8,000 high peaks. Less well known are the middle hills, which range from only 1,000 to 3,000 metres, but are home to much of Nepal's rural population. They make their living mainly through agriculture and forestry, and sometimes from tourists. People here are totally dependent on springs for their water supplies, and there is growing concern that their springs will be highly sensitive to any change in climate or land use. BGS and ICET Nepal are carrying out research in 2 catchments funded by the UK government to examine how dependent the springs are on recent rainfall or snowmelt, and therefore infer how sensitive they might be to future changes in climate. We're also talking to local farmers and water users to try to understand how they use water and what their fears and hopes are for their water supplies. In the village of Nangi, we gather together a farmer, a teacher and a chair of the water user group to explain a little about their village and their village water supply. Shobha from ICET Nepal translates for us.
Could you please ask them a little bit about the village?
यो भिलेजको बारेमा अलिकति केही भनिदिनु न सर।
नाङ्गी एउटा 2200 मिटर भन्दा ठाउँमा रहेको पहाडी गाउँ हो र यहाँ
What he says that this Nangi village is above the 2200 meter altitude. The main occupation of the people of the here is agriculture. Though many of the people who abroad for earning, still the agriculture is their mainstay. And this here there a lot of young people, they migrate to the other country for the justice.
What about the environment here? How's the environment been changing?
CGC has been explaining the changes within the 10 years. The changes they are experiencing that they're changing the rainfall patterns. Some years is quite dry, some years they have experienced quite a lot of rains. For example, last year and this year they have experienced very high rains. And before that they have experienced a dry year. And she also want to mention that when ISEC Nepal came here and worked, they explained that they experienced a very shortage of water and there was a drought, so they are experiencing some changes, but that is not regular, in the not regular way. The changes are irregular and erratic.
Where do they get their water supply from here?
The people in the Nagi, they drink water from main 5 sources, which is Rato Zapra, Chitro Pasu, and Bhatti Garane, and there are 3 other main sources. But still there are other small sources, but it's very negligible. Main sources are 5 here. Yeah, around 5 and 6 main sources they are getting out.
Do they have any issues with their water supplies?
Yes, they do experience some problem with the water sources, because the water from the source when they get water is not quite managed and haphazardly managed, and that's why they are facing sometimes they are facing the water problem. So that's why they have formed a 11-member committee which include all the females, and they have taken the project from the water and sanitation project. They have taken some program, which is the government program, and they are trying to manage the water so that the water supply is continuous and sustainable.
Have they got anything they would like to say to water scientists? What would they like water scientists to actually be working on to help them or people like them in the Middle Hills in Nepal?
So, to have a better science of how the water changing with the climate change, and she wants a sustainable water supply for the village, and also she wants to have a quality check of the water and what are the alternative method, so we can quality check the water and we can ensure that the water is very good and hygienic to consume.
Okay, well, thank you very much, all of you, for your time and for answering all these questions.
Okay, so just to draw out a few points from that video, what are we learning? There's a few things just to pick up on. One thing's very clear is that they want to manage their own water supplies, they want to be involved, they want to have these water user communities and to work with the government WASH programs. They're very interested and they were very keen to help us with our work out there. One of the other things that they mentioned that they want from us is to know that the water that they're using is of good quality, and they want to be able to check that quality for themselves. It's very, very key. But I think the biggest issue that comes across when we spoke to the locals and when we spoke with people in the other villages was this concern about a changing climate, and more specifically about changing rainfall patterns. And they talk about erratic weather, so they talk about very intense rainfall events, but perhaps they're more spatially restricted. We're hearing lots of anecdotal evidence about springs declining in flow or drying completely. Are these two things connected, or are there other reasons why the springs might be declining? But answering this question for them is going to be very difficult for us because there's very little baseline data here. The springs aren't being monitored and the rainfall data is very poor, and it's certainly not done at the resolution that would allow us to answer that type of question. So there's a challenge ahead. We need to get that data collected if we're going to start tackling the questions or the concerns that the people in the local communities actually have. So lots more work for us to do, I think. And that's where I'll leave it. Thanks.
Thank you.